Some common components that make up a spirit trap. Obviously, there's always a container of some kind to hold the spirits. It often includes some kind of a lure to draw the spirit in. So that can look like invocations or inscriptions, mesmerizing devices, some kind of a scent or personal element that's tied to the person who's presumed to be a target of the spirit. So that will draw the spirit in. They often include some sort of a component of complicated, tangled, or woven elements that the idea is that they will entangle or bind spirits, part of what makes it a trap. And then they often will have a way to neutralize, destroy, or to send the spirit away, kind of to some place where it can't bother us. Just a couple of examples here. I thought it would be fun to look at a couple of examples of spirit traps from different, areas before we get into witch bottles. So on the left is an example of a Mesopotamian Hebrew incantation bowl. So these were um, ancient spirit trap devices where it's got an incantation written in a spiral form around the interior of the bowl, leading into, like, in the center. There's an image of a being who's sort of a guardian, and then these bowls would be placed upside down, like in the underneath the floor of the house or whatever. And so the idea is that the spirit gets drawn in and trapped under the bowl. In the center of the image here, you have some witch balls. These are kind of glass baubles. I think they originated as floats for fishing nets, and people have often used them as spirit traps. And then on the right is an image of a Tibetan ghost trap. So that's like a woven style of spirit trap. But yeah, those are just a couple examples of other traditions, like how they build spirit traps. But let's get into talking about witch bottles. They originate as a counter witchcraft tool, starting in early modern Britain. And so originally they were kind of more of an aggressive form of counter witchcraft, basically like a counter curse rather than just a generalized protective device. And they would be used when a person believed that they had been cursed by a witch in order to kind of get back at that witch. And they operated on kind of this idea of sympathetic magic and the concept of the spirit body, or the witch's double or fetch, or whatever you want to call that. So the notion was that when a witch cursed you, it forged a link between the witch and their victim. And that link could be exploited in order to retaliate at the person who had cursed you. And then they also kind of are built on this idea that the witch, in order to curse someone, they would send their spirit or their double to inflict the curse. And this spirit body or double can be trapped or bound or harmed when it is coming to you. So just looking at, like, sources of information and the distribution of this practice, it is described in kind of pamphlets and documents about counter witchcraft from the 16th century and onward in mostly Britain. Um, they also have found many, many examples of witch bottles, as archaeological remnants that have been unearthed in houses and underground. Um, the distribution is they're found kind of throughout Britain, but they are concentrated especially in England and Cornwall and kind of the southern part of the island. A few examples from Ireland, Wales, Scotland, or Guernsey Island. And then they are imported into the New World, so we do find them in North America as well. So I mentioned that this idea of a witch bottle as a form of counterattack is sort of the original form of it, and this type of use of a witch bottle is more prevalent in those early documents. So, like in the 17th, 16th, 17th, 18th century, um, they usually included the urine of the victim, salt, and some kind of sharp objects like nails, pins, or needles. And the idea is that the victim's urine, the person who believed they had been cursed, their urine would be used in order to exploit that sympathetic link between the witch and the victim that I mentioned earlier. So you would put your urine in the bottle along with salt and some pins or needles or some kind of sharp objects. And then the bottle was supposed to be heated to boiling, like on a fire. And the idea is that this would inflict pain on this witch that had cursed you. And the belief was that a successful ritual would force the witch to come and make a deal in order to stop this counterattack. And the documents talk about, like, the person would come and knock on your door and beg to be given the bottle so that they could, um, stop the pain. And would agree to stop their curse in order to get you to stop hurting them back. These boiled bottles would often explode, because obviously it's a sealed container that you are boiling these contents inside of. And so the notion was that it would explode and it would be discarded. So the ones that are found in houses and such are of a different type. And so this other use of witch bottles as a form of more generalized protection rather than a counter curse becomes more prevalent starting like from the mid 18th century onward. And these are the ones that we find. So buried or concealed bottles that get, put underground, put in the walls of a house, that kind of a thing that gradually replaces this counterattack ritual. And the focus is more on the witch bottle as a spirit trap or defense of the home. So it has some of the same components. It has a bottle to contain the spirit. It still uses urine to attract the spirit, and it still uses sharp objects like pins or nails to wound and destroy the spirit that is attacking you. But you start to see other items being added to the bottles, like things for entrapment and binding. So just to go over some of the components that we see in these, the bottle, up until the mid 18th century, they were often using these stoneware bottles. And you'll see the example on screen. It has kind of like a little molded face and decorative patterns on the bottle. This is an example of something that was called a Bellarmine or Bartman jug. They're just a type of stoneware bottles that were commonly being imported into Britain from somewhere on the continent. This sort of round-bellied bottle that has often got an anthropomorphic mask imprinted on it, and sometimes other kinds of ornamentation. Um, the we still do see glass bottles and vials as well in this period, but these stoneware, anthropomorphic bottles were a lot more popular. And then as time goes onward, you see more and more glass. The lure, so the component that draws, the spirits into the to witch bottle, typically it's urine, and they have tested some of these, you know, um, ancient bottles that have been pulled out of houses. Sometimes they can test the contents or the residues and know that there was urine in there. There's often also hair and nail pairings, so that's another bit of the person that can act as a lure, and also the hair can act as an entangling um, agent to sort of entangle and trap and bind the spirit. Occasionally, you find little effigies or figures, so basically representations of the person that is meant to attract the spirit. And then there are a few examples with things like heart-shaped pieces of fabric or leather that have been stuck with pins. And of course, weaponized objects are in these bottles. So most commonly, iron nails and pins. Sometimes other iron, sharp objects like broken off tines from a rake. Other metal objects like bronze, brass, or silver or copper pins. Just basically whatever sharp objects people could find. They are often ritually bent, like you can tell that they've been intentionally bent because they're all bent to the same angle, which tells you that this was done intentionally. And the belief is that if you bent or broke these objects, it sort of ritually killed the object, so it is present as a ghost of itself. Since you're trying to trap a spirit and attack a spirit with these, then you want a ghost pin to attack the ghost. Sometimes you see other organic materials, thorns, bark, wood, blades of grass, even small bones. Um, Possibly these are alternate, pins. Like if a person didn't have any metal pins, they might just find whatever they could find that is sharp. And then other magical items that are sometimes found in these written charms or names: sulfur, lead, beads or ornaments, thread, insects, small animals, animal skin, seaweed, stones, leaves, earth, all kinds of things. That's not an exhaustive list. Um, yeah, obviously people are imaginative, and um, their individual ritual when they made these witch bottles might have had components that um, are different than kind of the core elements of the practice. Just a few visuals here. On the left is a witch bottle that's been, I guess it's like an X-ray scan. So you can see that it has that liquid level in it. It has the bent pins and nails. It looks like that one might have some hair in it as well. You can see these other examples are images of items that were pulled out of witch bottles. You can see that the nails and the pins have been bent. You can see some of them are bent to the same angle, so they were held in a group and bent in order to, spiritually kill that object so that it's in there as a ghost pin. And then we can talk about placement, where these are being deposited. And the idea seems to be that they are usually placed in order to protect vulnerable entry points to the house. So the most common place where they have been found is beneath the hearthstone or inside of a fireplace nook. But we also find them beneath floors and thresholds of doors, in roofs, sealed up inside of walls. Pretty common as well. A few have been pulled out of gardens or culverts or streams or ditches or just in the ground. Occasionally, they have been found buried with the dead. So, like in a grave or inside of a casket. And this seems to indicate a belief that the person may have been killed by witchcraft. And so this is being placed in their grave as a kind of counterattack. This is a quote from Brian Hoggard's book, Magical House Protection. He says, if people believed that the hearth needed to be protected in particular, as it was always open to the sky, then this clearly implies that something would come down it. Here it can be imagined that an actual body of energy of some kind had been projected from the witch and was airborne, aimed at its potential target and following the scent of its intended victim. Upon entering the chimney, it would smell its victim and plunged downwards to attack, only to discover it had been fooled and was now trapped inside the belly of a tiny urine-filled humanoid the Bellarmine, and was skewered by the ghosts of dead pins, nails, and thorns. I just thought that was like a vivid kind of illustration of what this process looked like. And this is a quote from a researcher who was gathering accounts of folk practices in South Carolina in the 1970s. He says, I did encounter the use of witch bottles in the German American and Afro American communities. Their principal uses were twofold. First, they were used as a trap or a snare for an evil spirit or the spirit of an evil person. Usually, some lure was used to draw in the spirit, and then the bottle would be capped and sealed with wax. It was considered important for the bottle to contain some physical element of the person: hair, nail clippings, etc. The bottle, once sealed, was kept in a secret place by the root doctor or powwow. So while I still have a few more minutes before we take questions, I wanted to also go over a few kind of observations about making your own witch bottles. So kind of building off of this historical information and my own experiences of working with this practice. So, we've seen like the core components, a container to serve as a trap, personal elements that smell like you or are connected to you as a lure, some objects to wound and hurt harmful spirits, and items that help by entangling or mesmerizing or confusing spirits. And then this is deposited in a place where wanted spirits are most likely to try and enter. So those are kind of the building blocks there. That leaves a lot of room for creativity. Um, I have seen people replace the urine with wine or spirits in the bottle. Um, if you just don't want to deal with urine, or it's something where you think you may need to reopen the bottle or, work with it more than once. Um, Obviously, like if you aren't using urine as a connection to yourself, then you need to put something else in there that acts as a lure. I often, when I do these, will also use incantations to invoke helping spirits and deities that I trust, because I find that is a helpful way to um, bring more power to the work, and also to make sure that it's guided in the best way possible. I also like to make a perimeter using multiple witch bottles. So like I will place them kind of around the boundaries of the place where I live. And another thing that is not talked about much in the literature, because archaeologists aren't trying to use this practice for the most part, um, is that I find that there's a need to maintain, well, all of your spiritual boundaries and protections, but witch bottles included. So spirit traps in general need to be maintained. It's not just like a set it and forget it kind of a thing. So when you have something that traps spirits, especially if they aren't neutralized or moved on in some way, spirit traps that just contain spirits and hold them there, those spirits can kind of become problematic. And so I think this is one of the reasons why most of these spirit traps include some kind of a component that's either going to eat those spirits or destroy them or just send them on somewhere. You don't just want them sitting in a trap. And then also over a period of years, these kinds of defenses, their effectiveness can wane. So um, they may need to be cleansed and replaced or refreshed in some way. Obviously, if you've buried your witch bottle in the ground, you're probably just going to leave it there, but you may need to, create a new one every few years. I just, personally, that's been my observation, that their effectiveness has kind of an endpoint. But they do last for several years, and I find them a really helpful practice. And yeah, so that's the end of my slides. where to find me, my website is bansheearts.com, and you can find all of my socials, and links and an email contact from there. I'm also going to mention that I have a new book out, The Magic of the Otherworld. It is, yeah, sorcery that is inspired by Celtic traditions. It's officially out July 8th, but I hear that it's already starting to land on people's doorsteps. So, um, yeah. And I'm going to end this screen share and take a look at the questions in the chat. So without trying to scroll up all the way, if you posted a question earlier in the presentation, feel free to put it back in the chat again so that I'll see it. One of the questions here is, when maintaining your witch bottles, is it better to refresh an existing bottle or create a new one? Um, Personally, if I am doing a traditional witch bottle that I have put urine into, I'm not going to reopen it. So I will put new ones every 3 to 5 years. You can kind of do other kinds of spirit traps or hybrid practices that might be more amenable to cleansing and refreshing, and but as far as I'm concerned, with like a witch bottle that you have peed inside of, you're not going to want to reopen that. Mm. So the next question that I see is, can mirrors be used in the bottle, or is that a different protection spell? um, I would think of a mirror as a different kind of spell. So, mirrors are often used um, to kind of repel. So, for us, it's like a shielding effect, right? So, like, things that come into the mirror are reflected back. There is a Southern conjure and hoodoo practice with mirror boxes where things are contained inside a mirror box, but that's a different kind of spell. So I would say, like, I wouldn't the only use I might have for mirrors in a witch bottle is if they're broken, because then they're sharp. So this is a great question here. How do we ensure that a witch bottle does not negatively impact benevolent spirits or familial spirits that are welcome in our home? It's a really great question. I think, in the sort of traditional historical examples, that's one of the reasons why they are using urine and hair and things like that, because the notion is that that is a lure that is going to draw spirits that are trying to hunt you, right? And so your beneficent spirits, your familial spirits, the ones that are good and you don't want to trap, they aren't going to be trying to hunt and eat you. So they aren't going to be lured by that, is the idea. I personally also find it, well, part of my ritual when I set up these kind of protections is to alert my spirits that I'm doing this, so that they know it's there. They've helped me set it, and they're not going to be surprised by it. You can also use incantations like on the bottle or in the bottle as warnings to beneficent spirits, like to make that trap more specific, so it is only a trap for harmful spirits. Another question: what would be an appropriate way of disposing of an old witch bottle? um yeah, I mean, it seems like, historically people would just leave them. If you don't want to do that, um, the best way to neutralize a trap like that is to break it, right? And so it's no longer a trap if it's broken and the container is no longer um, whole. So just to smash it, and then you can scoop the broken materials into something to dispose of them. Oh, here's an interesting question. This person says, my house basement was once an embalming area. A lot of spirits lurk here. Do I need to make several bottles? Yeah. So that gets into kind of a whole question of like trapping and harming spirits is not the only way to deal with them, right? So like I used to have my tattoo studio in a building that had formerly been a funeral home. And so yeah, it was full of spirits. um but my first move isn't to trap them and get rid of them. My first move anywhere with spirits is to see which ones I can make friends with. And oftentimes there is some potential for that. And so like I always pair this kind of a practice with um overtures to make alliances and make friends with local spirits, see if there are offerings I can make to them that will help us come into alignment with one another. I find that the more friends you have in the spirit world, the less uh, fierce of protections you're going to need, because those spirits are then also going to look out for you. So, yeah, if your house has been a place of embalming, a funerary site, probably do have extra spirits there compared to other places. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to trap and get rid of them all. Some of them might be ones that just need some help to settle them. Some of them might be spirits that could be your friends. And this person asked, can you use specific iconography or symbolism to target specific spirits or particular spirits? Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we find, you know, sometimes inscriptions and or in witch bottles and other kinds of spirit traps, because you absolutely can target them. It's sort of, I guess, the equivalent of building different kinds of traps for different kinds of animals. This person asked if you should break the bottle outside your house when you are disposing of it. Yes, yes. I would not do that in the house. Another person asked, "Can you define bad spirits?" Um I don't really divide spirits into good and bad in that way. That kind of, dualistic way of looking at the world to me is just not compatible with my animistic view of the world. So I don't really believe in bad spirits. I think of spirits in kind of an ecological framework. So if you think about like the natural world, there's all kinds of creatures and plants and animals and many species. Some of them are very dangerous to us, right? Some of them are predatory and would eat us if they could. Some of them carry diseases that are communicable to us. Some of them, um, you know, are toxic or venomous or, poisonous. There are beings in the world that are dangerous for us. That doesn't mean they're bad or evil, but we might still need to take precautions. Or you can think about, members of our own species. There are members of our species. There are people who are predatory or would like to do us harm if we give them a chance. Spirits aren't really that different, right? So when I talk about harmful or dangerous spirits, I'm not talking about good and bad, good and evil. It's for me, it's sort of more of an ecological way of looking at them. And I'm seeing one more question. Um, this is an interesting one. This person asks, can you use a friendly version to draw in benevolent spirits, like an offering or housing, so they stay? Yeah, I wouldn't use a witch bottle for that because with, benevolent spirits, we're not trying to trap them. Um, I do have a practice of creating spirit houses or spirit shrines, where it's, not so much a container as um, a home that you're offering them as a place to seat themselves and an object that they can take up residence inside of. But we wouldn't necessarily be creating that as a container that is intended to entrap, right? That's more of it's like a birdhouse. um, so I you can use a jar or a bottle for a spirit house, but I would probably not seal it. And I wouldn't kind of create it in this sense of like a trap. Yeah, so there have been a lot of really great questions that I couldn't get to. um, and I apologize for that, but thanks for being here, and it was great to chat with you all.